Hello, 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 friends. Nicholas here with DIVOted Talks, DIVOted Talks, where we take ancient wisdom and practices and take them through a modern lens and experience to help end suffering for you and those you love. Ooh, I think that might be a good one. Anyway, I was actually excited. I looked at our viewership for this channel on Spotify, and we had a huge spike the other week. And it was cool to see more people were at least getting impressions. I don't know how many people actually listened. But it's nice to know that we're hitting the airwaves. So if you're new here, welcome. If you are old here, thanks for being here and finding value in what I have to say. So that being said, what to talk about? Life is very challenging. And not just from it's hard and then you die, but beyond that, because it's very dense, it's very heavy, and it's known in the ancient wisdom about this, right? There's just a thickness to life and the experience, and then add the fact that, our thoughts create feelings and emotions in our body, and then it's a whole nother level of challenge. In some ways, I would posit that it was probably easier when we had, just to focus on survival. Like, I think, obviously, I'm saying that generalized, and, there are specifics, right? Because in certain areas, there's probably large animals that could come kill you. And so you had to be careful, but you were still living in accordance with nature, and you were still living with the cycles that exist there, versus now where we're, divested of cycles, yet still, subservient to the cycles, because we are a part of nature. We are not separate. No matter how hard we try to be separate, there are still things that affect us. Energetically, magnetically, like there's a lot of things going on, right? Like solar flares mess up electronics. What do you think they're doing to us, right? It's well documented about how people act differently under the full moon. Like there's just things, and maybe it was a cultural phenomenon that people said and noticed, and then they perpetuated it and created that manifestation. But I don't think so. I think it's actually these influences of the natural world upon us, and we still try to pretend like we're somehow separate because we keep looking and living separately. And when I mean looking, I mean viewing and observing as outsiders rather than participants. And yet we are still participating, even if we're not paying attention to the fact that we are participating. So, none of us are free of the influence of suffering. Suffering is something that is waiting there to be experienced, because there are things that are always going to be different than what we wanted, desired, or thought they should be. And in that has a seed of suffering. In that has the potential for suffering. And that has a lot of opportunity to take hold in our lives. Now, it's us who has a strong practice, and us who are consistent or steadfast or working towards via spirituality, via our mental capacities, via whatever it is we do to be less impacted by it. But it's still waiting there. It is a klesha. It's a seed. It's waiting to blossom, to take root and go. And sometimes, even if it does start to germinate and start to grow, we can catch it before we do, right? Just like going out and weeding in the garden. If you do it consistently every day, you don't have big giant root systems that you have to dig up that may harm the other plants or stifle the other plants. And so I hated pulling weeds because it was so boring. And yet now I have a life that I wish more than anything that I had the time to go do something so simple as weed the garden. I'm sure some of you out there can totally relate to what I'm saying there. I mean, it's just a fire hose of experiences and information and life day by day by day by day. And it's challenging. And not just challenging, but it's a lot to digest. And so we've talked about that before. We're constantly taking in and consuming the world, whether we're conscious of it or not. And then each of those consumptions, whether we're aware of it or not, have to be digested. And so in other episodes, we've talked about how sometimes you feel off, but you can't really pinpoint it. But clearly, from an Ayurvedic perspective, there is something going on, whether it's the influence of nature, whether it is the influence of the things that you've consumed. Like I said, we may be taking on influences of nature and not aware of it because we're not paying attention, because we think of ourselves as separate when we're not in the least at all. And so these things have to be digested, and that can tie up a lot of our energy. It can tie up a lot of our well-being. It can tie up a lot of our day-to-day function, and how that manifests is going to be different person to person to person. And so what we're left with is this juxtaposition of, here's life, things happen, how do I view what's happening? And so Ayurveda and yoga and contemplative, practices that exist out there, like Zen Buddhism or even just Buddhism in general, would have us recognize that these things are going to happen, and that our practices can influence how quickly they abate, our relationship to them, and our experience of them when in contact with them. Right? So having a healthy understanding of the fact that they are there and will keep showing up as they do, as they will. It doesn't have to knock us for a loop. It doesn't have to completely debilitate us. And how do we fix that? Well, one, it's not something to fix. And I wanted to make sure to get that in there. It's not something to be fixed. It is something to be practiced. That hurt. But sometimes you can get hit and get back up. And the more you practice getting hit and getting back up, the easier it is. And maybe sometimes you can see the blow coming and you can dodge it completely and move out of the way before it gets to you. Ooh, that looks like that's going to be mentally heavy. Let me take a moment and get centered so that I keep it in perspective and the right relationship, so that it doesn't knock me out at the knees or, knock me out completely. And you know what? Part of the practice too is sometimes things are going to knock you sideways, but how quickly do you get back in line? How quickly do you get back to, your set point, your harmonious experience in the center? And, as we said, life is hard. And it's not hard because of it itself being hard. It's hard because of the way we choose to live our lives and relate to life. And so how are you living and relating to life? And then taking that a step further, how would you like to be living and relating to life? And in the meantime, be well and be free.